Michael Andrews had everything: wealth, power, and prestige, until a single visit to his childhood home unraveled it all. Confronting a mother's sacrifices and a father's secrets, he's forced to redefine what true success means. Can love and family mend 30 years of broken ties? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Michael Andrews stepped out of his luxury car, staring at the small house where he grew up. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown, and the mailbox tilted to one side. His expensive Italian shoes crunched on the gravel driveway as he approached the front door, his heart pounding with each step. "I should have come sooner," he whispered to himself, remembering the countless times his assistant had reminded him about calling his mother. But there was always another meeting, another deal, another excuse. The door wasn't locked. It never was, not in this neighborhood where everyone still knew each other by name. The familiar creak of the hinges transported him back to his childhood, but what he saw inside stopped him cold. There was his mother, Louise Andrews, on her hands and knees, scrubbing the floor with trembling hands. Her silver hair had fallen from its usual neat bun, and her breathing came in short, labored gasps. A bucket of dirty water sat beside her, and her worn house dress was soaked at the knees. "Mom!" Michael rushed forward, his designer suit forgotten. As he knelt beside her, "What are you doing? You shouldn't be doing this." Louise looked up, surprise and joy fighting for space on her tired face. "Michael, is it really you?" Her hands, red and wrinkled from the water, reached out to touch his face. "I wasn't expecting you. The floor was dirty, and I wanted everything. To be nice when you finally visited." The words hit him like a physical blow. How long had she been waiting for him to visit? How many times had she cleaned this floor, hoping he would come? "Come on, Mom. Let me help you up." He gently lifted her to her feet, noticing how light she felt, how fragile. She'd lost weight since he'd last seen her. When was that? Last Christmas? No, the Christmas before. The realization made him feel sick. "I'm fine, really," Louise insisted, but her legs wobbled as she tried to stand straight. "Just a little tired. You know me, I can't stand a dirty house." Michael helped her to her old armchair, the one where she used to sit and read him stories when he was little. The upholstery was worn, the stuffing showing through in places. How had he not noticed how everything was falling apart? "When was the last time you saw a doctor, Mom?" Louise waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I don't need doctors. They just want to fill you up with expensive pills. I'm managing just fine." But she wasn't fine. Michael could see it clearly now. Her skin had a grayish tinge, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, even as she tried to smooth her hair back into place. "I brought you something," he said, reaching for the gift bag he'd dropped by the door. Inside was an expensive silk scarf from his recent trip to Paris. It had seemed like a perfect gift in the boutique, but now, surrounded by the threadbare furniture and worn carpet, it felt hollow and meaningless. Louise accepted the scarf with a smile that broke his heart. "It's beautiful, Michael. I'll save it for special occasions." "Mom?" He knelt beside her chair, taking her rough, work-worn hands in his manicured ones. "Why didn't you tell me you needed help? You could have called." "You're a busy man," she said softly. "I see you in the business magazines. Read about all your success. I'm so proud of you, you know. You've become everything I ever dreamed you could be." But had he? Looking around the house where this woman had sacrificed everything to raise him alone, Michael saw his success differently. Every million in his bank account, every luxury car in his garage, every headline with his name, they all felt like betrayals now. He remembered the nights she'd worked double shifts at the diner to pay for his college applications, the way she'd gone without new clothes for years so he could have a computer for his studies, the proud tears in her eyes at his graduation, even though she'd had to leave early to get to her cleaning job. "I'm staying," he announced suddenly. "I'm going to take care of everything." Louise started to protest, but Michael shook his head. "No arguments, Mum. I should have been here sooner. I should have..." His voice cracked and Louise reached out to stroke his hair, just like she used to when he was a little boy. "My sweet boy," she murmured. "You're here now. That's what matters." But Michael knew it wasn't enough. As he held his mother's hand, watching her pretend she wasn't in pain just to make him feel better, he made a silent vow. He would make this right. No matter what it took, he would become the son she deserved. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the dusty windows. In his pocket, Michael's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from his office, from his girlfriend Victoria, from his business partners. For the first time in his adult life, he didn't reach for it. Instead, he got up and went to the kitchen, determined to make his mother a proper meal. The cabinets were nearly empty, the refrigerator bare except for a few basic items. Another failure he would have to correct. As he heard his mother's rocking chair creaking in the living room, Michael Andrews, CEO of Andrews Global Enterprises, worth over $2 billion, finally understood what real poverty looked like. He had spent years building his fortune, while the richest heart he knew lived in near poverty. That was going to change, starting now. The morning light streamed through the kitchen window as Michael made breakfast. He'd spent the night in his old bedroom, sleeping on the same narrow bed from his teenage years. His back hurt, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. "What's all this?" Louise asked, shuffling into the kitchen in her faded robe. She stared at the plates of eggs, toast, and fresh fruit that Michael had brought from the grocery store at dawn. "Breakfast," Michael said simply. "Sit down, Mom, please." His phone rang for the 10th time that morning. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. "Aren't you going to answer that, dear?" Louise asked, carefully sitting down at the kitchen table. "It must be important." Michael turned the phone off completely. "Nothing's more important than this." He set a cup of tea in front of his mother. "We need to talk." But before he could continue, there was a knock at the door. Sarah Martinez, the next-door neighbor who'd lived there since Michael was a child, burst in without waiting for an answer. "Louise, are you okay? I saw a fancy car outside and—" She stopped short at the sight of Michael. Well, look who finally remembered where he came from. Michael felt the sting of her words, but Sarah wasn't finished. "Do you know your mother fell last month right there on those back steps? If I hadn't heard her calling—" "Sarah, please," Louise interrupted. "Michael doesn't need to hear about that. He's a busy man." "Too busy for his own mother?" Sarah crossed her arms. 3 days she was in the hospital. 3 days, and where were you?" Michael's hands gripped the back of a kitchen chair. "I never knew about the hospital." He looked at his mother. "Why didn't you tell me?" "The doctors said it was just a dizzy spell," Louise said quickly. "Nothing to worry about, and look at me now, I'm fine." "You're not fine, Mom." Michael pulled out his phone and turned it back on. "I'm calling Dr. Harrison." "Robert Harrison?" Louise smiled. "He was such a nice boy. Used to mow our lawn in high school. He's the best cardiologist in New York now," Michael said, already dialing, "and he owes me a favor." Sarah watched this exchange with narrowed eyes. "So now you're going to sweep in and fix everything just like that?" "Yes," Michael said firmly. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." The doorbell rang again. This time it was Victoria Stone, Michael's girlfriend, dressed in designer clothes. That looked as out of place in the modest kitchen as a peacock in a chicken coop. "Michael, darling, why aren't you answering your phone? The board meeting started 20 minutes ago, and everyone's—" She trailed off, taking in the scene. "Oh. Hello?" Louise struggled to her feet. "Oh, you must be Victoria. Michael's told me so much about you." It was a lie. Michael had barely mentioned Victoria in his rare phone calls, but his mother would never let on. "How quaint," Victoria said, looking around the kitchen, her nose wrinkled slightly at the chipped cups and worn tablecloth. "Michael, sweetheart, we really need to go. The Peterson deal won't close itself." "The deal can." "Wait," Michael said. "I'm staying here." Victoria's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. "Staying here? But what about the charity gala tonight? The governor's counting on your donation." "Then he'll have to keep counting," Michael snapped. Then, seeing his mother's worried face, he softened his tone. "Victoria, my mother needs me." "Your mother has managed just fine all these years," Victoria said with a tight smile. "Surely she doesn't expect you to put your whole life on hold." Sarah made a disgusted sound. "His whole life? Lady, this is his life, this woman right here. She worked 3 jobs to put him through college. She went hungry some nights so he could eat. Where were you when she was sacrificing everything for him? Sarah, Louise protested weakly, but she had to sit down again, her face pale. Michael was at her side instantly. Mom, what's wrong? Just a little tired, Louise said, but her hands were shaking worse than ever. I'm calling an ambulance, Sarah declared, already pulling out her phone. No, Louise tried to stand. No hospitals. I can't afford. I'm paying for everything, Michael said. No arguments. Victoria watched this scene unfold with growing impatience. Michael, be reasonable. You can hire a nurse, set up a care facility, but you have responsibilities. Yes, Michael said quietly. I do have responsibilities. I'm just finally recognizing what they are. He turned to Victoria. Go back to the office. Tell the board I'm taking a leave of absence, indefinite. A leave of... Have you lost your mind? Victoria's voice rose. What about our plans? The summer house in the Hamptons, our wedding? Louise's head snapped up at this. Wedding? You're getting married? The hurt in his mother's voice was like a knife in Michael's heart. He hadn't even told her about his engagement. No, he said firmly. I'm not. Victoria's mouth fell open. Excuse me? You've never once asked about my mother, Michael said, the truth dawning on him as he spoke. In 2 years you've never wanted to meet her, never cared about where I came from. What does that say about us? It says we have priorities. Victoria's voice was shrill now. It says we understand that success requires sacrifice. No, Michael said, looking at his mother's worn face. Success without love is just fancy-wrapped failure. I think you should go. Victoria stood very still for a moment. Then she pulled the massive diamond ring off her finger and slammed it on the table. When you come to your senses, don't call me. She turned and stormed out, her heels clicking angrily on the worn linoleum. There was silence in the kitchen. Then Sarah let out a low whistle. Well, maybe there's hope for you yet, Michael Andrews. The ambulance sirens could be heard in the distance. Michael held his mother's hand, remembering all the times. She'd held his when he was scared or sick. Everything's going to be different now, he promised her. Everything. Louise squeezed his hand weakly. You don't have to give up your life for me. I'm not giving up anything, Michael said. I'm finally starting to live it right. As the paramedics came through the door, Michael knew there would be consequences. The board would be furious. The business papers would speculate. His carefully built empire might even crumble. But watching the gentle way Sarah helped his mother onto the stretcher, seeing the concerned faces of neighbors gathering outside, Michael understood what he'd been missing all these years. Success wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in love. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital was a far cry from the private clinics Michael usually frequented. He watched through glass doors as doctors worked on his mother, his expensive suit wrinkled from hours of waiting. Mr. Andrews? A nurse approached him. Her name tag read Jenny Martinez. Are you related to Sarah Martinez? She's my mother's neighbor, Michael replied, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Why? She called earlier, asked me to keep an eye on your mother. Jenny's kind eyes reminded him of his mother's. I grew up in your neighborhood. Your mum used to give me cookies when I visited Sarah, my aunt. Before Michael could respond, Dr. Robert Harrison strode through the doors, his face serious. Michael had called in every favor he had to get him here. Michael, Robert said, shaking his hand, I wish we were meeting again, under better circumstances. How is she? Your mother has severe cardiovascular disease. She's been managing diabetes without proper medication. Her blood pressure is dangerously high. Robert's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Michael, these aren't new conditions. They've been developing for years. The words hit Michael like physical blows, years. His mother had been sick for years, and he hadn't known. Can you help her? We'll do everything we can, but I have to ask, why hasn't she been receiving treatment? With your resources, she never told me, Michael said, his voice hollow, and I never asked. Just then, his phone buzzed. Thomas. Parker, his CFO, was calling again. Michael had ignored 20 calls from the office already, but this time he answered. This better be important, Tom. Important? The company's in chaos. The board's talking about forcing you out. Victoria's father is threatening to pull his investment. The stock's down 15% since word got out about your leave of absence. Michael watched through the window as nurses adjusted his mother's IV. Handle it. Handle it. Michael, you've spent 10 years building this company. You're just going to throw it all away for my mother? Yes. Michael's voice was steel. And if anyone on that board has a problem with that, they can buy me out. He hung up, turning to find Jenny watching him with newfound respect. Your mother talks about you all the time, she said softly, always showing everyone your pictures in magazines. My Michael, she calls you. My successful boy. A sharp pain shot through Michael's chest. She's proud of a son who didn't deserve it. Maybe, Jenny agreed, but you're here now. Dr. Harrison emerged from the examination room. We need to run more tests, but Michael, she's asking for you. Inside the room, Louise looked small and fragile against the white hospital sheets. Monitors beeped steadily around her. When she saw Michael, she tried to smile. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm causing so much trouble. Michael took her hand, fighting back tears. No, Mum, I'm the one who's sorry, but I swear things are going to change. Michael. She squeezed his hand weakly. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago. Mum, you need to rest. No, this is important. Louise's eyes were intense. It's about your father. Michael stiffened. His father had abandoned them when Michael was just a baby. It was the one topic his mother never discussed. He didn't just leave us, Louise continued. He tried to come back when you were 10. What? He wanted to be part of your life. Had a good job, had cleaned himself up. Louise's voice trembled. But I was so angry, so hurt. I told him to stay away. Said you were better off without him. Mum, he sends Christmas cards every year, keeps track of you in the news. Tears rolled down Louise's cheeks. I have a box in my closet with everything he sent. I was wrong to keep it from you. I was just so afraid of losing you. Michael's world tilted on its axis. All these years he'd carried anger toward a father he thought had completely abandoned him. Had that anger driven him, made him focus on success at all costs? His name is James, Louise whispered. James Sullivan. He lives in Boston now. Before Michael could process this revelation, alarms started blaring. Louise's eyes rolled back, her body going rigid. Mom! Mom! Dr. Harrison and a team of nurses rushed in, pushing Michael aside. She's crashing. Get a crash cart in here. Michael found himself in the hallway, watching through the window as they worked to save his mother's life. Jenny appeared beside him, pressing a cup of coffee into his hands. Your mother's strong, she said. She raised you alone. She can fight this. But Michael barely heard her. His mind was reeling from his mother's revelation. A father who hadn't abandoned them completely. Christmas cards, a box of memories hidden away. His phone buzzed again. More crisis calls from the office. Michael turned it off completely. In the midst of this medical crisis, his mother had given him yet another gift, the truth. And possibly a chance to heal an old wound he'd carried his entire life. Mr. Andrews, a young doctor emerged from his mother's room. We've stabilized her, but what? She's going to need surgery, and soon. The procedure is risky at her age with her conditions. Cost isn't an issue, Michael said immediately. Whatever she needs. It's not just about money, Dr. Harrison said, joining them. She's weak. The recovery will be long and difficult. She'll need constant care. Michael straightened his shoulders. Then I'll learn how to take care of her. Jenny touched his arm gently. I can help, between my shifts, and Aunt Sarah. The whole neighborhood will help. Looking at the young nurse's sincere face, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced. In years, the warmth of true kindness with no agenda attached. In his mother's room, the monitors beeped steadily again. Through the window, Michael could see her sleeping peacefully now, unaware of how her revelation had shaken his world. He had decisions to make about his company, about his life, about a father in Boston he'd never known. But for now, he just pulled up a chair beside his mother's bed, took her hand, and began his vigil. The world outside could wait. This time he would be there when she opened her eyes. The hospital corridor buzzed with early morning activity as Michael stood at the coffee machine, his tie loose around his neck. It had been 3 days since his mother's revelation about his father, and sleep had become a distant memory. "You look terrible," Sarah Martinez said, appearing beside him with a paper bag. "Here, real breakfast, not this hospital stuff." The kiumi smell of fresh homemade bread and eggs made Michael's stomach growl. "You don't have to do this." "Of course I do. Louise would never forgive me if I let you starve." Sarah's expression softened. "She's asking for you." Michael headed back to his mother's room but stopped short at the door. Thomas Parker, his CFO, was standing by his mother's bed. "Tom, what are you doing here?" Louise smiled weakly from her bed. "Such a nice young man. He was just telling me about how much the company needs you." Michael's jaw tightened. "Mom, you need to rest Tom outside now." In the hallway, Michael fought to keep his voice low. "How dare you come here and upset her? She needs to understand." "What's at stake?" Tom insisted. "Michael, we're losing millions every day you're away. The Peterson deal is falling apart. Victoria's father is calling in his loans. I don't care." "Well, you should. Everything you've built is crumbling. And for what? To play nurse to a woman who—" Michael grabbed Tom's expensive suit collar. "Choose your next words very carefully. Is everything okay here?" Jenny appeared, her nurse's uniform crisp despite the early hour. "Mr. Andrews, your mother's vital signs are elevated. She doesn't need stress right now." Tom straightened his jacket. "I'm just leaving, but Michael, the board meets at noon. If you're not there, they're voting to remove you as CEO." After Tom left, Jenny touched Michael's arm. "Are you okay?" "I built that company from nothing," Michael said quietly. 10 years of my life, missing holidays, birthdays, everything. And now you're exactly where you need to be," Jenny said firmly. "Come on, your mum's worried about you." Inside the room, Louise was trying to sit up straighter. "Michael, sweetheart, you can't lose your company because of me." "Mum, please, the company doesn't matter." "It does matter. I've seen how hard you've worked." Louise's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't tell you about your father to add to your burdens. I just couldn't keep it inside anymore." Michael sat beside her bed. Have you read his cards? The ones he sends?" Louise nodded slowly. "He has 2 other children now, your half-sisters. He's been sober for 20 years. She hesitated. "He asks about you in every card." A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Harrison entered, looking serious. "The test results are back," he said. "We need to schedule the surgery for tomorrow morning." "So soon?" Louise's voice trembled. "We can't wait any longer. Your heart—" "Do it," Michael said firmly. "Whatever she needs." Dr. Harrison nodded. "The surgical team will be in later to explain everything. But Michael, a word?" In the hallway, the doctor's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "The surgery. It's very risky. You need to be prepared." Michael felt the floor sway under his feet. Jenny appeared again, steadying him. "I'll stay with her," she offered. "You need to deal with your company." "I can't leave her." "The surgery's not until morning. Go, fight for your company. Show her that everything will be okay." Michael looked at his watch. 2 hours until the board meeting. His mother's words echoed in his head. She'd seen how hard he'd worked. Back in the room, Louise was dozing. Michael kissed her forehead gently. "I'll be back soon, Mom, I promise." "Michael." Her eyes fluttered open. "In my closet. The blue shoebox. Your father's letters." "Rest, Mom. We'll talk about it when I get back." Sarah was waiting outside the room. "I'll stay with her. Jenny's right. Go deal with those vultures." Michael nodded gratefully. "If anything changes, we'll call. Now go show them what Louise Andrews' son is made of." The drive to his office felt surreal. The familiar skyscrapers seemed cold and distant now. In the lobby of Andrews Global Enterprises, employees stared as he passed. His assistant gasped when she saw him. "Mr. Andrews, the board is already gathering, and Mr. Stone, Victoria's father." He's demanding to see you first. Michael straightened his tie. Tell them I'll be right there. In his office, he looked at the wall of awards and magazine covers that had seemed so important just days ago. His phone buzzed. A text from Jenny. Your mum's resting. She's strong, like her son. Michael touched the screen gently. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box, the ring Victoria had thrown at him. It had cost more than his mother's house. The intercom buzzed. Sir? They're waiting. Michael pocketed the ring and stood. He knew what he had to. In the boardroom, 12 faces turned to him. Victoria's father, Richard Stone, stood at the head of the table, Michael's usual place. Nice of you to join us, Richard sneered. Ready to watch everything you've built disappear? Michael smiled, feeling strangely calm. No, Richard. I'm here to buy you out. All of you. The room erupted in chaos, but Michael wasn't finished. I'm selling my vacation homes, my cars, my art collection, and this. He placed Victoria's ring on the table. Should cover your investment, Richard, with interest. You can't be serious, dead serious. You want to fight me on this? Fine, but remember, I built this company. I know where all the bodies are buried. Michael's voice was steel. So take the money and go, or stay and watch me tear everything down trying to save it. The room fell silent. In that moment, Michael saw his reflection in the window, and for the first time in years, he recognized himself. His phone buzzed again. Jenny. She's asking for you. Meeting's over, Michael announced. My lawyers will be in touch. As he walked out, leaving the stunned board behind, Michael felt lighter than he had in years. He had one more stop to make before returning to the hospital. His mother's house looked different in the afternoon light. Inside, he went straight to her closet. The blue shoebox was there, stuffed with 20 years of Christmas cards, letters, and photos. On top was a recent photo of a man in his 60s, gray-haired but with Michael's eyes, standing with 2 teenage girls. On the back was written, "Your sisters would love to meet you someday." Michael picked up the box and headed back to his car. Tomorrow his mother would face surgery, but she wouldn't face it alone. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to write a letter to Boston. The night before Louise's surgery, the hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. Michael sat in the uncomfortable chair he'd come to know well, the blue shoebox open on his lap. "Read another one," Louise said softly from her bed. She was pale, but her eyes were bright with interest. Michael pulled out another Christmas card, dated 15 years ago. "Dear Louise," he read, "thank you for the photo of Michael's college graduation. Even from the back row, I could see how proud he looked in his cap and gown. The girls are asking about their big brother again." His voice caught. Louise reached for his hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was so wrong to keep this from you." Before Michael could respond, there was a knock at the door. Jenny entered with Dr. Harrison. "Time for your pre-op medications," Jenny said gently, moving to adjust Louise's. Dr. Harrison checked the monitors. Everything looked stable. The surgery's scheduled for 8 a.m. He turned to Michael. "You should try to get some rest." "I'm staying." "Michael," Louise protested weakly. "You haven't slept properly in days." "I'm not leaving you alone." "She won't be alone," Sarah said from the doorway. She entered carrying a thermos. "Fresh coffee, and I brought your old photo albums. Louise, remember you asked for them?" Michael stood. "Photo albums?" "From when you were little," Louise explained. "I wanted, just in case something happens tomorrow." "Nothing's going to happen," Michael said firmly, but his voice shook slightly. Jenny touched his arm. "Michael, why don't you take a walk? Get some air, we'll stay with her." He wanted to refuse, but the weight of the past few days was crushing him. The business crisis, the family revelations, the fear about tomorrow's surgery. It was all becoming too much. 20 minutes, he agreed finally. "I'll be right back, Mom." In the hospital garden, Michael found a quiet bench and pulled out his phone. He'd been carrying his father's phone number, found in the latest Christmas card, for days now. His finger hovered over the keypad. What would he even say? "Hi, this is your son, the one you haven't seen in 30 years. It's not..." As scary as it seems. Michael looked up. Jenny stood there holding 2 cups of real coffee, not the hospital variety. What? Calling him, she said, sitting beside him. I saw the number you've been staring at, and I recognize that look. It's the same one my dad had before he called. His estranged family. Your father? Jenny nodded. He was an addict, missed 10 years of my life, but he got clean, like your dad did. When he finally called, it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And now? Now he walks me down the hospital corridors every morning before his shift in maintenance. 10 years sober and the best grandfather my kids could ask for. Michael stared at his phone. What if he doesn't want to hear from me? Those letters say otherwise. Jenny stood up. But that's tomorrow's problem. Right now your mom needs you and Michael. She's asked to see a priest. The words hit him hard. His mother had always been religious, but this request felt ominous. Back in the room, Father Thomas from their old parish was just leaving. He smiled kindly at Michael. Your mother is at peace, he said softly. She's a remarkable woman. Inside, Louise was looking through one of the photo albums with Sarah. Her face lit up when she saw Michael. Come look at these, she called. Remember this birthday party? You were 6. Michael sat beside her bed, looking at a photo of himself covered in chocolate cake. His mother looked so young, so beautiful. In the picture, laughing despite the clear exhaustion in her eyes. You worked 3 jobs that month to buy me that bicycle, he remembered suddenly. You wanted it so badly, Louise smiled, and your paper route money wasn't quite enough. Speaking of money, Michael said, pulling out some papers, I need you to sign these, Mum. What are they? I'm adding you to all my accounts, and I've set up a trust. No matter what happens tomorrow, you'll never have to worry about money again. Louise's eyes filled with tears. Michael, no, your money is It was always yours first, he said firmly. Every dollar I ever made started with you believing in me, working yourself to exhaustion for me. This is just me paying back. A fraction of what I owe. Sarah sniffed loudly. Well, would you look at that? Louise Andrews's boy finally grew up. Just then, Michael's phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Richard Stone announcing hostile takeover attempt. Press conference tomorrow, 9 a.m. Michael turned the phone off without responding. Bad news? Louise asked anxiously. Nothing important. Michael took her hand. Tell me more about these photos. They spent the next hours going through the albums. Louise told stories Michael had never heard, filling in the gaps of his childhood with details only a mother would remember. Around midnight, Jenny came in to give Louise her final medications before surgery. You should try to sleep, she told Louise gently. Just one more thing, Louise said. She gestured to the box of letters. Michael, if anything happens tomorrow, Mom, don't. Listen to me. If anything happens, you read every letter and you call him. Promise me. Michael's vision blurred with tears. I promise, but you're going to be fine. You have to be. Louise reached up to touch his cheek. I love you, my boy. I've made mistakes, but loving you was never one of them. Sarah and Jenny quietly left the room, giving them privacy. Michael held his mother's hand as she drifted off to sleep, the medication taking effect. In the darkness, he could hear her soft, steady breathing. On the table beside her bed, the photo albums lay open, showing a lifetime of love captured in faded photographs. The box of letters sat beside them, 20 years of missed connections waiting to be bridged. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. The surgery, Richard Stone's threats, the weight of decades of family secrets. But for now, in this quiet room, Michael Andrews kept vigil beside his sleeping mother, counting each precious breath and praying to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. Please, he whispered into the darkness, please let her be okay. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere in Boston, a man named James Sullivan was perhaps looking at his own old photographs, wondering if his son would ever read his letters. Dawn broke over the hospital, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Michael stood at his mother's window, watching the sun rise, his untouched coffee growing cold. It's time, Dr. Harrison said quietly from the doorway. "We need to prep her for surgery." Louise was already awake, her face serene despite the tension in the room. "Michael, sweetheart, come here." He knelt beside her bed, taking her fragile hand in his. "Mom, I want you to know something," she said softly. "Whatever happens today, you've made me so proud these past few days, not because of your money or your company, but because you've shown me your heart again." Jenny and another nurse entered with a gurney. "Mrs. Andrews, we need to get you ready now." As they began to transfer Louise to the gurney, her hand caught Michael's sleeve. "The letters," she whispered. "Remember your promise." "I remember. But you're going to tell me all about them yourself after the surgery." Sarah appeared in the doorway, out of breath. "Did I miss anything?" "Louise Andrews, don't you dare go into that operating room without hugging me first." The nurses waited patiently while Sarah embraced her friend. "You fight, you hear me? We still have too many stories to tell." Michael's phone buzzed, his assistant again. "Richard Stone's press conference starting. CNN covering live." "Michael," Louise said, noticing his distraction. "Your company." "Doesn't matter." "It does matter. All your hard work." Her voice caught. "Go, deal with it. I'll still be here when you're done." "I'm not leaving." "Actually," Dr. Harrison interjected, "the surgery will take at least 6 hours. And the waiting room, well, it's not exactly private." Jenny touched Michael's arm. "There's a TV in your mother's room. You can watch the press conference here, then go handle what you need to handle. I promise we'll call if anything changes." Louise squeezed his hand. "Go show them what an Andrews is made of." After one last kiss on his mother's forehead, Michael watched them wheel her away. Sarah stayed with him until she disappeared around the corner. "She's right, you know," Sarah said. "You can't help her by sitting here worrying. Go fight for your company. I'll stay and pray." In his mother's room, Michael turned on the TV. Richard Stone's face filled the screen, standing at a podium with Victoria at his side. "Regrettable that Michael Andrews has chosen to abandon his responsibilities," Richard was saying. "But the board has a duty to shareholders. That's why we're announcing a tender offer for all outstanding shares." Michael's phone rang. Tom Parker, his CFO. "Michael, he's trying to steal the company. He's lined up financing from..." "Good." "Good?" "Michael, are you listening? He's going to take everything." Michael walked to the window, looking toward the operating room wing where his mother was being prepped for surgery. "Tom, remember that startup we passed on last month? The one with the revolutionary cancer treatment." "What?" "Yes, but buy it, all of it. Use my personal funds." "Are you crazy? That company's burning cash." "It's also working on cardiac treatments. Buy it now before Stone's announcement drives up all medical stock prices. But then call a press conference, 2 hours, in front of St. Mary's Hospital." Michael hung up and turned back to the TV. Victoria was speaking now, tears in her eyes. "Michael changed," she was saying. "He's not the man I agreed to marry. The Michael I knew would never let sentiment cloud his business judgment." Michael turned off the TV and picked up his mother's box of letters. Inside was a recent photo of his father at his half-sister's high school graduation. They had his eyes. His hands trembling slightly, he dialed the number he'd been carrying for days. It rang 3 times. Then, "Hello?" The voice was deep, slightly rough with age. Michael's throat tightened. "Hello, is anyone there?" "Mr. Sullivan," Michael managed. This is Michael Andrews, your son." The silence that followed felt eternal. Then, "Michael, oh my God, I've prayed for this call for so long." "Mom's in surgery," Michael said, the words tumbling out. "It's her heart. She showed me your letters, all of them, and I thought you should know." "Louise, she's sick." The concern in his father's voice was genuine. "Which hospital? I can be there in 4 hours." "You'd come?" "I've missed 30 years of being your father. I won't miss this." 2 hours later, Michael stood in front of St. Mary's Hospital, facing a wall of reporters. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, but his voice was strong. "My mother taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars," he began. She worked cleaning houses, including the Stones mansion, to put me through college. Today she's fighting for her life in this hospital, and today I'm announcing that Andrews Global is changing direction. He outlined the acquisition of the medical research company, the new focus on affordable healthcare technology, the plans to turn his mother's story into a foundation for helping working single parents. Mr. Stone can try to take my company, he concluded, but he can't take what really matters, not anymore. As the reporters shouted questions, Michael's phone buzzed. Jenny. She's in surgery, everything's stable so far, and there's someone here asking for you, says he's your father. Michael looked up. Through the hospital entrance, he could see a tall man with grey hair, wearing a worn leather jacket. Two teenage girls stood beside him, looking nervous and excited. Mr. Andrews, a reporter called out, are you really willing to lose everything? Michael smiled, thinking of his mother. No, he said quietly. I'm finally making sure I don't. He walked away from the microphones, toward the father he hadn't seen in 30 years and the sisters he'd never known. Behind him, camera flashes went off like stars. In the operating room, Louise's heart continued to beat, steady and strong, as Dr. Harrison worked to repair 3 decades of damage. And in the waiting room, a family that had been broken for 30 years began the delicate surgery of healing itself. Sarah and Jenny watched it all unfold, sharing knowing looks. Like one of those soap operas Louise loves so much, Sarah commented. Jenny smiled. Better. This one's real. The day stretched ahead, full of uncertainty. But for the first time in years, Michael Andrews was exactly where he needed to be, surrounded by the true measure of wealth, family, love, and the chance to make things right. The surgery waiting room had never felt so crowded. Michael sat between his half-sisters, Emma and Grace Sullivan, while their father James paced nervously by the window. Sarah dozed in a corner chair, refusing to leave until she knew Louise was okay. She really kept all our cards? Emma asked softly. At 16, she was the spitting image of Michael's high school photos. Every single one? In a blue shoebox, Michael replied. She saved everything. Dad cried when you called, Grace confided. At 14, she had their father's gentle smile. He keeps your magazine covers in his office. Shows them to everyone. James stopped pacing. Girls, it's true, Dad, Emma insisted. He's so proud of you, Michael, even though he couldn't tell you himself. Before Michael could respond, Jenny rushed into the waiting room. Everyone stood up, hearts racing. She's out of surgery, Jenny announced, smiling. Dr. Harrison says it went better than expected. The relief in the room was palpable. Sarah burst into tears, hugging Jenny tightly. When can we see her? Michael asked. She's in recovery now. Dr. Harrison will come talk to you soon. Jenny's eyes moved to James. But you should know. She was mumbling your name when she started waking up. James went pale. Mine. She's been carrying you in her heart too, Sarah said quietly. All these years. Dr. Harrison appeared, still in his surgical scrubs. The surgery was a complete success. We repaired. The damage to her heart and her vitals are strong. He smiled at Michael. Your mother's a fighter. When will she wake up? We'll keep her sedated for a few hours, but you can see her soon, one at a time. Michael's phone buzzed. Tom Parker again. Stocks up 30%. Medical community's going crazy over the acquisition. Stone's backing down. You did it. He turned the phone off without replying. None of that mattered right now. An hour later, Michael stood in the recovery room doorway. Louise looked peaceful, surrounded by monitors and machines. Her face had more color than it had in days. Talk to her, Jenny encouraged from behind him. She can hear you. Michael sat beside the bed, taking his mother's hand. Hey, Mom, the surgery went great and there's someone here to see you. A lot of someone's, actually. Louise's fingers twitched slightly in his. Emma and Grace are beautiful, Mom. They have your kind eyes, and Dad... Michael's voice caught. He came just like all those letters said he wanted to. He's here. In the hallway, James watched through the window, tears streaming down his face. Sarah appeared with coffee for everyone. You know, she said to James, Louise never took that wedding ring off, not once in 30 years. James touched his own ring finger, where a tan line showed where his ring had been until 15 years ago. I kept mine too in my dresser drawer. I just couldn't let go. Emma and Grace exchanged looks. Is that why you never remarried? Dad? Grace asked. Some loves, James said softly. You only get once in a lifetime. Jenny checked Louise's vital signs. Everything's perfect. She's doing better than we hoped. Just like a soap opera, Sarah commented. All we need now is someone to come back from the dead. Don't even joke, Michael said, but he was smiling. As evening fell, Louise began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, focusing on Michael. Hey, beautiful, he said softly. The surgery. Perfect. You've got a strong heart, Mom. Always. Did. Louise's eyes moved to the window where James stood with their granddaughters. Her breath caught. I'm dreaming. No, Mom, they're real. Dad came as soon as I called. And wait till you meet Emma and Grace. They've been so excited to see you. Tears rolled down Louise's cheeks. James, is it really you? James entered slowly, his own eyes wet. Hello, Louise. You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Emma and Grace peeked around their father shyly. Louise's hand trembled as she reached out to them. My granddaughters, she whispered. Oh, you're both so lovely. Sarah wiped her eyes. I'm going to get more tissues. Jenny, come help me. Let's give them some privacy. As they left, Jenny squeezed Michael's shoulder. Sometimes healing comes in ways we never expect. In the room, Emma and Grace carefully hugged their grandmother, while James and Michael stood side by side, watching the scene unfold. I've missed so much, James said quietly. We all have, Michael replied, but we're here now. Louise looked around the room at the family she'd thought was forever broken, now somehow healing. My heart, she said softly. It feels so full. Well, they did just fix it, Grace said, making everyone laugh. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled like stars. In his pocket, Michael's phone buzzed with more news about the company, but he didn't even feel it. His real wealth was right here in this room. Jenny did one final check of Louise's vitals before ending her shift. Everything's perfect, she announced, almost like a miracle, Sarah finished. Like family, Louise corrected softly, holding both James's and Michael's hands. Like coming home. As night fell over the hospital, the Andrews Sullivan family began the gentle work of knitting themselves back together. There would be challenges ahead, years of hurt to heal, stories to share, trust to rebuild. But for now, in this quiet, room love was doing what it did best, making broken things whole again. And somewhere in the hospital chapel, Sarah lit one last candle, not for healing this time, but in gratitude, for second chances, for restored hearts, and for the kind of love that never really dies. It just waits patiently for the right moment to bloom again. A week after the surgery, Louise's hospital room looked more like a family living room. Get well cards covered every surface, many from neighbors, who'd known Michael as a boy. Emma and Grace had decorated the walls with their artwork, and James's worn leather jacket hung on the back of a chair like it had always belonged there. Ready for your walk? Michael asked, helping Louise sit up in bed. These short daily walks were crucial for her recovery, Dr. Harrison had explained. I don't know why everyone makes such a fuss, Louise protested, but her hands shook as she gripped the walker. I'm perfectly fine. Sure you are, Sarah said from the doorway. That's why you tried to sneak out of bed yesterday and nearly gave poor Jenny a heart attack. I just wanted to fix Michael's collar. He was going on TV looking rumpled. Mom, the interview was about the new Medical Research Foundation. Nobody cared about my collar. The foundation had been Michael's first act after regaining control of his company. Richard Stone had backed down after the medical acquisition sent Andrews Global's stock soaring. Victoria had tried to call multiple times, but Michael never answered. Your tie was crooked too, Louise muttered, taking small steps toward the door. James appeared with 2 cups of tea, Louise's favorite blend from home. Still trying to take care of everyone else before yourself? Some things never change. The look that passed between them made everyone else fade into the background. After 30 years apart, James and Louise had fallen into a gentle dance of small kindnesses and shared memories. "Remember when Michael was 7, James said, helping Louise into a chair by the window, and he insisted on making us breakfast in bed. Louise laughed softly. Cornflakes floating in orange juice because we were out of milk, but he was so proud. "Hey," Michael protested, but he was smiling. These stories, these fragments of a childhood he'd tried to forget, were healing something deep inside him. Emma and Grace burst in carrying shopping bags. "Grandma, we got you something." "Girls," James warned, "your grandmother needs rest." "It's okay," Louise said quickly, still getting used to the word grandmother. "Come show me." The girls pulled out a soft blue sweater and matching slippers. "The nurse said you can wear real clothes now," Emma explained, "and Michael told us blue is your favorite color." Louise touched the sweater gently. "You didn't have to." "Actually," Grace said, "we got it with our allowance money. We've been saving up for when we finally met you." The room grew quiet. Louise's eyes filled with tears. "Okay," Jenny announced, entering with perfect timing. "Physical therapy in 10 minutes. And I see someone's already up and in the chair. Good job, Mrs. Andrews." "Please," Louise said, "call me Louise. After all, you're practically family now." Jenny blushed. Michael looked away quickly, but not before Sarah caught his expression and raised an eyebrow. "Speaking of family," James said carefully, "I've been thinking. My lease in Boston is up next month." Louise's hand flew to her throat. "James, there's a nice house for sale," he continued, "just 3 blocks from yours. The girls' school has a great transfer program, and I can work from anywhere now that my construction company's stable. Dad's been checking out real estate listings all week," Emma Stage whispered to Michael. "He's totally nervous about it." "Girls," James sighed, but he was smiling. Louise reached for his hand. 3 blocks away?" "Too close?" James asked softly. "I don't want to push." "Not close enough," Louise whispered. The moment was interrupted by Dr. Harrison's arrival. "Well, this is what I like to see, my patient, surrounded by family and getting stronger every day." After examining Louise, he pulled Michael aside. "She's doing remarkably well, better than we expected. Having everyone here, it's the best medicine she could get." Michael nodded, watching his mother show the girls an old photo from her wallet, his kindergarten graduation. "I can't believe you kept this all these years," James said, looking over their shoulders. "I kept everything," Louise admitted. Every moment." "Time for therapy," Jenny announced gently. "But first, Mrs. Louise, you have some more visitors." Tom Parker entered, looking uncomfortable in the hospital setting, followed by several board members. "Michael," Tom said, "we need your signature on these." He held up a stack of papers. "The medical research acquisition is complete, and the foundation paperwork." "Later," Michael said firmly, "but my mother's about to do her physical therapy. The papers can wait." The board members exchanged glances. This was not the Michael Andrews they knew, the man who'd once conducted a merger negotiation during his own appendectomy. "Actually," Louise said, struggling to stand, "I'd like everyone to stay. If I'm going to walk down this hallway, I want all my family to see it." "Mom, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm. "These nice board members need to see what really matters. Maybe then they'll stop calling you at midnight about stock prices." Sarah snorted. James hid a smile. The board members looked mortified, slowly, steadied by Jenny on one side and Michael. On the other, Louise took her first steps. James walked behind with the girls, ready to help if needed. Even Tom and the board members found themselves holding their breath, watching this small woman's determined progress. "Look at you go, Louise Andrews," Sarah called out. "Just like when you used to run after Michael when he was learning to ride. That bike." "She's amazing," Emma whispered to Grace. "Think we got some of that strength in our genes?" "Hope so," Grace replied. "We're Andrew Sullivans now. We've got 30 years of family stuff to catch up on." At the end of the hallway, Louise turned carefully. Her face was flushed with effort but triumphant. "Well," she said to the watching board members, "still think my son's wasting his time. Here?" Tom Parker cleared his throat. Mrs. Andrews, I think we understand now. Good, Louise smiled. Because he learned his business sense from me, you know. And I say family is the best investment you'll ever make. Later, after Louise was resting and the board members had left, Michael found Jenny updating charts at the nurse's station. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. Jenny looked up, her eyes meeting his. Just doing my job. No, Michael said. You did much more than that. You helped me see what really mattered. Down the hall, they could hear Emma and Grace reading to Louise while James and Sarah argued good-naturedly about the best recipe for chicken soup. Your mother's right, you know, Jenny said softly. Family is the best investment. Michael looked at her for a long moment. Would you maybe want to get coffee sometime, when all this is calmer? Jenny smiled. I thought you'd never ask. In Louise's room, the family continued their gentle work of rebuilding. There would be more challenges ahead, houses to buy, schools to transfer, lives to rearrange. But the foundation was strong now, built on 3 decades of love that had never really died, just waited patiently to bloom again. And if anyone thought, it was strange that a billionaire CEO now spent his afternoons helping his mother walk hospital corridors and arguing with his teenage sisters about boy bands, well, they just didn't understand what real wealth looked like. Louise Andrews stood in front of her house, barely recognizing it. The peeling paint had been replaced with a fresh coat in her favorite butter yellow. The garden bloomed with fresh flowers, and the old creaky steps had been rebuilt. Michael, she breathed, what did you do? Don't blame just him, Sarah said, coming up the walkway. The whole neighborhood pitched in. Even Tom from your company showed up with a paintbrush. Michael supported his mother's arm as they walked toward the front door. Jenny supervised everything. She said it had to be perfect for your homecoming. Jenny, who'd taken a few days off to help with the transition, blushed. The gold heart pendant Michael had given her last week sparkled at her throat. Speaking of perfect, James pulled up in his truck, Emma and Grace bouncing excitedly. In the back. Special delivery! The girls rushed forward with a wrapped package. Open it, Grandma. Inside was a handmade photo album. The first page showed a picture from the hospital. Louise surrounded by her newly complete family. There's lots of empty pages, Grace explained, for all the new memories we're going to make. Like Dad moving in next door, Emma burst out, then clapped her hand over her mouth. Oops, that was supposed to be a surprise. James ran a hand through his grey hair. Well, I got the house. If that's still okay. Louise's eyes filled with tears. Next door? The blue one, Michael said. I may have helped with the down payment. Consider it 30 years of missed child support. Michael, James started, but his son cut him off. We've got a lot of time to make up for, Dad. Let me help. Inside, the changes continued. The old furniture had been carefully restored, not replaced. Louise had insisted on keeping the pieces that held so many memories. But there were new curtains, a comfortable medical bed disguised as a couch, and state-of-the-art monitoring equipment that connected directly to Jenny's phone. The kitchen's the best part, Sarah announced, leading the way. Show her, Michael. The kitchen had been completely renovated, with lower counters and wider spaces between appliances to accommodate Louise's walker. But there, in the center, was her old kitchen table, the one where she'd helped Michael with his homework, where she'd counted pennies to pay bills, where she'd kept his father's letters hidden in a drawer. Oh, Louise whispered, touching the familiar wood. You kept it. Of course, Michael said. This table's seen our whole story. And it's about to see more, Jenny said, pulling out chairs. I believe someone promised to teach the girls how to make her famous apple pie. Emma and Grace immediately began pulling out ingredients they'd secretly stashed earlier. James watched Louise settle into her familiar spot at the table, looking at home for the first time since the hospital. Remember the first pie you tried to make? He asked softly. Right after we got married? Burned black as coal, Louise laughed, but you ate every bite. Because you made it with love, Sarah pretended to gag. Oh Lord, they're getting mushy. Again. I'm going to check on the medical supplies Jenny set up in the bedroom. But she was smiling as she left. remembering how she'd held Louise 30 years ago when James had left, and how she'd prayed for exactly this kind of miracle. Michael's phone buzzed, another message about the Medical Research Foundation. But before he could silence it, Louise spoke up. "Answer it," she said firmly. "Just because we're all together doesn't mean the rest of the world stops." "Mom, I've got plenty of help here," she insisted. "Your father's moving in next door. Sarah's across the street. Jenny checks my vitals more than she checks her own, and the girls have already planned activities for every day after school. We're going to teach Grandma TikTok," Grace announced. "Lord help me," Louise muttered. James laughed, that deep, rich laugh that Louise had missed for 30 years. Michael watched his parents share a look that held decades of love, loss, and renewal. "Go," Jenny urged him gently. "The foundation's important too. It'll help other families like yours." Michael kissed his mother's cheek before heading to the home office he'd set up down the hall, close enough to hear the happy chaos of pie making, but quiet enough to work. Through the open door, he could hear his family. "No, Emma, that's way too much cinnamon. Dad, you're rolling the dough too thin. James Sullivan, get your fingers out of that filling. Make him stop, Grandma." Jenny appeared in his doorway. "Need any help with those foundation documents?" "Actually," Michael pulled her into the room, "I wanted to ask you something else. About dinner, tomorrow night. Just us." "Are you asking me on a real date, Michael Andrews?" "Well, we did kind of do everything backwards. Family approval before the first date." Down the hall they heard a crash followed by laughter. "I should go check on them," Jenny said. "Probably," Michael agreed, but he didn't let go of her hand. They stood there for a moment, listening to the sounds of their quirky, healing family. Through the window, they could see Sarah directing a delivery truck, more furniture for James's house next door. "You know," Jenny said softly, "when I first met you in that hospital room, I never imagined that you'd end up part of this crazy family, that I'd fall in love with a billionaire who values dish towels his mother embroidered more than his stock portfolio." Michael pulled her closer. "Best investment I ever made." Their moment was interrupted by Emma's voice. "Grandma, Dad and Michael are both being mushy with their girlfriends instead of helping with the pie." "Good," Louise called back. "Maybe we'll actually get some baking done without them sampling everything." The house filled with laughter, the kind of laughter that had been missing for 30 years. In the kitchen, Louise taught her granddaughters the secret to perfect pie crust, while James watched adoringly. In the office, Michael and Jenny shared their first real kiss. And somewhere, in a drawer of that old kitchen table, a box of letters sat waiting to be reread, not with sadness now, but with gratitude for the long road that had led them all back home. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over this scene of ordinary family happiness, the kind of happiness that only comes after great loss, great love, and the courage to believe in second chances. 6 months. After Louise's surgery, the Andrews' backyard was transformed. White chairs lined a flower-covered path and fairy lights twinkled in the early evening glow. The old apple tree, under which Michael had once played as a child, now bore witness to another family milestone. "Stop fussing," Sarah told Louise, adjusting her friend's pale blue mother-of-the-groom dress. "You look beautiful." Louise touched the pearl necklace at her throat, a gift from James on what would have been their 35th wedding anniversary. "I just want everything to be perfect. It's not every day your son gets married in your backyard." Speaking of perfect, Emma burst in, her bridesmaid's dress swishing. "Jenny looks amazing, and she's not even nervous." "Unlike my brother," Grace added, following her sister. "Dad's trying to help him with his tie, but Michael's hands are shaking so bad." Louise smiled, remembering another nervous groom 35 years ago. James had dropped the ring twice during their ceremony. "Go help your father with Michael," she told the girls. "Make sure he remembers to breathe." As they rushed off, Sarah helped Louise to the window. In James's backyard next door, they could see the reception table set up, glowing with candles. The whole neighborhood had pitched in, just like they had for Louise's homecoming. "Did you ever imagine?" Sarah asked softly. 6 months ago when he found you cleaning that floor. Louise squeezed her friend's hand. God works in mysterious ways. Speaking of mysterious, Sarah grinned, wait until you see what James has planned for after the ceremony. Sarah Martinez, what do you know? Let's just say some promises are worth waiting for. A knock at the door revealed Tom Parker, looking emotional in his best man suit. Mrs. Andrews, it's time, but first, he handed her an envelope. The final paperwork for the foundation. Everything's official. Louise opened it with trembling fingers. There, in black and white, was the name, the Louise Andrews Foundation for Family Health and Support. Michael insisted, Tom explained. Said everything good in his life came from you. Including Jenny, Sarah added. If you hadn't gotten sick. Don't, Louise warned. No tears before the ceremony. Now help me outside. I want to see my son get married. The backyard was filled with faces, both old and new. Hospital staff sat beside corporate executives. Jenny's large extended family mingled with neighborhood friends who'd known Michael since childhood. Even Richard Stone had sent flowers, though his invitation had mysteriously gotten lost in the mail. As Louise took her seat in the front row, James appeared beside her. You look stunning, he whispered. You're biased. Proudly, he took her hand. Our son's getting married, Lou, can you believe it? Before she could answer, the music started. Jenny appeared at the end of the flower-lined path, radiant in a simple white dress. But Louise's eyes were on Michael, watching his face as he saw his bride. He looks at her the way you used to look at me, she whispered to James. The way I still look at you, he corrected softly. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. Emma and Grace read poems they'd written themselves. Sarah dabbed at her eyes constantly. Tom managed not to drop the rings, but it was during the vows that Louise felt her heart, her newly strengthened heart, fill to bursting. Jenny, Michael said, his voice carrying across the hushed yard, you saw me at my worst and loved me toward my best. You helped me find my way back to what matters, to family, to love, to home. Jenny's eyes shone as she responded, Michael, you taught me that miracles don't just happen in hospitals. They happen when we're brave enough to let love heal us, when we choose family over fortune, when we come home. As they kissed, the gathering erupted in cheers, but James was suddenly pulling Louise to her feet. What are you doing? Something I should have done a long time ago. He led her to stand before the minister, who was smiling knowingly. Louise Andrews, 35 years ago, I made you promises I broke. Today, in front of our son, our granddaughters, and everyone we love, I want to make those promises again. Louise's hand flew to her mouth as James dropped to one knee, pulling out a ring, her original wedding ring, which she'd kept in that drawer with his letters. Will you marry me? Again, right now? The yard fell silent. Michael and Jenny, still at the altar, held hands tightly. Emma and Grace clutched each other, crying openly now. Louise looked at the ring, then at the man she'd loved for over 3 decades. Through separation and heartbreak, and finally, gloriously reunion. Yes, she whispered. Yes. The minister beamed. Well, folks, looks like we're having a double wedding. As James slipped the ring back where it belonged, as Michael and Jenny embraced them, as Sarah sobbed happily into her handkerchief, Louise looked around at her family, whole and healing and home. Later, during the reception, she danced with both her husband and her son. She watched Jenny teach Emma and Grace a silly dance move. She saw Sarah flirting with Tom Parker over wedding cake. Happy, Mom? Michael asked, holding her close during their dance. Louise smiled, her heart strong and steady in her chest. Remember when you found me cleaning that floor? How broken everything seemed. That was the day I started really living, Michael said. The day I remembered what you taught me about real wealth. And what's that? That the richest people in the world are the ones who come home to love. As the evening stars appeared above the twinkling lights, as 2 rings gleamed new on 2 sets of joined hands, as a family celebrated not 1, but 2 promises of forever, Louise Andrews Sullivan looked around at her abundance. A son who'd found his way home. A husband who'd kept loving her through 30 years apart. granddaughters who filled her days with joy, a daughter-in-law who'd helped heal them all, friends who'd become family, a home filled with more love than she'd ever dreamed possible. Yes, Louise thought, this was wealth beyond measure. This was the truest fortune. This was home. And somewhere, in a drawer of that old kitchen table, a box of letters rested, no longer a testament to loss, but a story of love's long journey. Home the end.